July 4, 2017. While fireworks filled the sky across the United States, millions of people stared at their screens in silence. They refreshed once, then again, then again. Nothing loaded. For some, it was curiosity. For others, confusion. For many, panic. Because what had disappeared was not just a website. It was AlphaBay. For years, AlphaBay had been a place people returned to every day. A routine. A habit. A system that felt stable in a world that was not. People trusted it with money, with decisions, with parts of their lives they never spoke about. And then, without warning, it was gone. No message, no explanation, no final word, just absence. On a day meant to celebrate freedom, one of the largest underground markets in internet history vanished without a sound. What made AlphaBay different was not secrecy. It was size. It was everywhere. It was always online. It felt permanent. And when something feels permanent, people stop asking questions. They stop imagining endings. They begin to believe that growth means safety. That scale means protection. That if millions are inside the same system, nothing can touch it. But history tells us something different. Every system that grows too large creates pressure. And pressure always finds the weakest point. Not in code, not in technology, in people. Because systems do not make mistakes. Humans do. AlphaBay did not collapse because it was careless. It collapsed because it believed it was untouchable. And when something underground becomes too big to ignore, its end usually begins long before anyone notices. When Silk Road was taken down, many believed the dark web had reached its end. They imagined fear, chaos, silence. They imagined users disappearing overnight, markets collapsing, trust evaporating. But that is not how people work. Because the dark web was never just a website. It was a response to control, to exclusion, to systems that felt distant and unchangeable. When Silk Road vanished, the need behind it did not. People did not suddenly become different. They did not suddenly stop wanting privacy, or anonymity, or a place outside rules they no longer trusted. What disappeared was a symbol, not the demand. And in that moment of uncertainty, millions of people were left floating. Vendors who had built entire livelihoods. Buyers who had trusted a system and lost everything. Moderators who believed they were part of something larger. They were not criminals looking for chaos. They were humans looking for continuity. They wanted something familiar. Something that worked. Something that felt stable again. So the dark web did what it has always done. It adapted. Quietly. Not through panic, but through patience. Forums filled with questions. Private messages spread rumors. People compared notes, shared warnings, rebuilt trust piece by piece. They were not searching for freedom. They were searching for normalcy. And in that fragile moment, when confidence was low and memory was short, a vacuum formed. A space waiting to be filled. History shows that whenever a system collapses, the next one does not rise by accident. It rises because people need it too. Because uncertainty is exhausting, and order, even fragile order, is comforting. Silk Road was gone, but the dark web was very much alive. It was watching, waiting, and soon, something new would step forward. AlphaBay did not arrive with noise. It did not announce itself as a revolution. It presented itself as a solution. After Silk Road, people were tired. Tired of uncertainty. Tired of losses. Tired of trusting something that vanished overnight. AlphaBay understood that exhaustion. It did not promise freedom. It promised order. Clear rules. Clear systems. Clear consequences. For users who had just been burned, that mattered more than ideology. AlphaBay felt familiar, but improved. Faster. Larger. More organized. It looked like something that had learned from the past, and people wanted to believe that. Vendors returned carefully at first, testing, watching, waiting for cracks. Buyers hesitated, then followed. Small transactions, short visits, quiet trust, nothing dramatic. Just routine rebuilding itself. What made AlphaBay powerful was not anonymity. It was structure. Disputes were handled. Ratings mattered. Rules were enforced. This was not chaos hiding in the dark. It was a marketplace that behaved like a business. And that illusion changed everything. Because when something feels professional, people stop treating it as temporary. They begin to plan around it, depend on it, build their lives to fit inside it. AlphaBay did not force trust. It earned it slowly, one resolved dispute at a time, one successful transaction after another, one quiet day without problems. Soon, people stopped comparing it to Silk Road. They stopped asking if it would last. They assumed it would. AlphaBay became part of daily life for millions who never spoke about it out loud. A hidden routine, a private habit, a system that worked. And when a system works long enough, people stop seeing risk. They see stability. They see safety. They see something that feels too organized to fail. But order has a cost. And the more people believe in it, the heavier that cost becomes. AlphaBay was no longer just filling a vacuum. It was becoming something much larger, something visible. Even if its users could not see it yet, as AlphaBay grew, something subtle began to change. Not the technology, not the platform, the people. Rules were everywhere. Clear rules, firm rules, what could be sold, what could not, how disputes were handled, who had authority. To many users, this felt reassuring. Rules meant safety. Structure meant control. Control meant protection. People began to relax. They logged in at the same hours, used the same accounts, trusted the same vendors. Habits formed quietly. What started as caution slowly became comfort. AlphaBay was no longer something people visited carefully. It became something they relied on, a routine. For vendors, it became a workplace. For buyers, a dependable destination. For moderators, a system they believed in. And belief is powerful. Because belief lowers guard. People stopped thinking in terms of risk. They started thinking in terms of efficiency. How fast things moved. How smooth transactions felt. How rarely problems appeared. When something works again and again, the mind begins to assume it always will. This is how the illusion formed. Not through lies but through repetition. AlphaBay did not need to promise safety. Its structure implied it. Ratings created trust. Dispute systems created fairness. Rules created the feeling of order. And order is comforting to humans. Even in the dark, especially in the dark, people told themselves stories. If something were dangerous, it would not feel this organized. If it were fragile, it would not run this smoothly. If it were temporary, it would not have rules this strict. But rules do not erase risk. They hide it. Because the more structured a system becomes, the more predictable the people inside it become. And predictability is visible. Every habit leaves a trace. Every routine leaves a pattern. Not in code, in behavior. AlphaBay felt safe because it behaved like a real-world institution. But that resemblance carried a quiet danger. Institutions are meant to be seen. And the moment AlphaBay began to feel normal, it stopped being invisible. The illusion of safety was complete, and that illusion would soon be tested. Behind AlphaBay there was not a crowd. There was not a committee, not a movement, not a shared vision. There was one person, quiet, distant, certain, someone who believed that systems do not survive on their own. They survive because someone controls them. AlphaBay did not feel chaotic because it was not allowed to be. Decisions were made. Rules were enforced. Conflicts were resolved. And at the center of all of it was a single point of authority. To the people inside the system, this felt reassuring. Someone was watching. Someone was in charge. Someone would step in if things went wrong. That belief created trust. But it also created dependence. Because the more a system grows, the more decisions it requires. And decisions are human. They are shaped by fatigue, by confidence, by pride. Power rarely announces itself loudly. It grows quietly, through repetition, through success, through the absence of consequences. Every day AlphaBay remained online reinforced a dangerous idea. That control was complete. That oversight was absolute. That one person could manage something this large without being seen. This is where the psychology shifts. Responsibility turns into ownership. Ownership turns into identity. The system is no longer something you run. It becomes something you are. And when that happens, distance disappears. Small choices begin to feel harmless. Personal routines feel safe. Shortcuts feel justified. Because the system has always worked before. Power does not corrupt instantly. It convinces. It whispers that order exists because of you. That stability depends on you. That without your presence, everything would fall apart. And once someone believes they are essential, they stop imagining replacement. They stop imagining failure. They stop imagining being watched. AlphaBay was no longer just a marketplace. It was an extension of a person, a mind, a routine, a set of habits repeated day after day. And habits, no matter how careful, always leave something behind. Not evidence, not code, but patterns. And patterns are where systems end. Because no matter how large a system becomes, it can never escape the limits of the human at its center. And AlphaBay was about to learn that lesson. As AlphaBay continued to grow, the pressure did not arrive suddenly. It accumulated. More users meant more noise. More vendors meant more disputes. More money meant more decisions. And every decision required time, attention, judgment. What once felt manageable began to feel heavy. Moderators worked longer hours. Messages arrived faster. Problems demanded immediate answers. There was no pause button. Growth did not create chaos. It created strain. And strain changes behavior. People respond faster. They cut corners. They repeat routines that once worked. Because repeating feels safe when there is no time to think. The system needed constant care, constant presence, constant control, and that control had to come from somewhere, from someone. As AlphaBay expanded, so did the expectations placed on the person behind it. Be available, be decisive, be invisible. Those demands contradict each other. To manage something this large, you must act, and every action leaves a trace, not a technical one, a human one. Timing, tone, consistency. Pressure reveals habits. Under stress, people fall back on patterns. They answer at familiar hours. They use familiar services. They rely on familiar routines. These patterns feel harmless from the inside. From the outside, they look like a signature. The larger AlphaBay became, the more often those patterns repeated. And repetition creates visibility. Not through a single mistake, but through many small ones. Choices that felt logical in isolation. Decisions justified by urgency. Shortcuts explained away by success. Because nothing had gone wrong yet. This is the most dangerous moment in any system. When success convinces people that warning signs are imaginary. That pressure can be managed. That scale can be controlled. That past victories guarantee future safety. But pressure does not disappear. It concentrates. And when it concentrates long enough, it forces errors. Not dramatic ones. Human ones. AlphaBay was no longer hiding in the dark. It was carrying the weight of its own size. And that weight was beginning to bend the people holding it together. The system had not failed yet. But it was starting to show where it would break. While AlphaBay grew louder from the inside, the response from the outside remained quiet. There was no sudden strike. No public warning. No visible pressure. Instead, there was patience. Investigators did not rush to shut the system down. They did not try to break it. They watched it. Because systems at this scale do not collapse from force. They collapse from understanding. They observed how the market behaved under stress. How disputes were resolved. How authority moved when problems appeared. They paid attention to timing. To rhythm. To consistency. Who answered first when things went wrong. Who stayed calm. Who spoke with confidence. This was not about servers or code. It was about people. Human behavior does not disappear online. It adapts. Habits repeat. Routines settle in. Patterns emerge quietly. And patterns tell stories. They reveal who is awake when others sleep. Who responds when others hesitate. Who carries responsibility when pressure rises. The larger AlphaBay became, the easier it was to observe these signals. Because growth creates noise. And noise makes movement visible. Investigators did not need to hurry. Time was on their side. Every day the system stayed online, it generated more behavior, more repetition, more predictability. The people inside AlphaBay believed they were hidden. They believed structure protected them. But structure also creates consistency. And consistency is readable. This kind of investigation does not feel dramatic. It feels slow, almost boring. But it is relentless. It does not attack the system. It lets the system reveal itself. By breathing, by moving, by continuing to exist. AlphaBay was not being hunted, it was being understood. And once a system is fully understood, its end is no longer a question of if, only when. The end did not arrive with noise. There was no countdown, no warning, no explanation. One moment AlphaBay was there, the next it was not. People refreshed their screens expecting a message. There was none. For some, it meant lost money. For others, lost work. For many, lost certainty. Years of routine vanished in seconds. No farewell. No final justification. No attempt to explain what had happened. Just silence, and silence has weight. Behind the disappearance was not a dramatic raid on servers. Not flashing lights. Not headlines. It was an arrest. Quiet. Ordinary. Human. A reminder that behind every vast system there is still a person. AlphaBay did not fall in public. It disappeared in private, and that made the ending harder to process. Because people can argue with accusations. They can debate evidence. They can resist force. But silence offers no one to blame. The market was gone. The figure behind it was gone. What remained was emptiness. And the realization that something many believed was permanent had always been fragile. It did not end with a statement. It ended the way many systems do. By simply no longer being there. When AlphaBay disappeared, many asked the wrong question. They asked how it was taken down. But the more important question is why it had to fall at all. AlphaBay did not fail because it was careless. It failed because it believed growth was protection. Because size feels comforting. Numbers feel powerful. Scale creates the illusion that responsibility is diluted. That if enough people are inside the same system, no one can see the individual anymore. But underground systems do not survive by becoming large. They survive by remaining unnoticed. The moment something becomes too big to ignore, it stops being hidden. And when it stops being hidden, it begins to obey the same rules as everything else. Human rules, limits, pressure, consequences. AlphaBay was not destroyed by technology. It was undone by belief. The belief that order could replace caution. That structure could erase risk. That growth could protect people from being seen. But systems do not escape human nature. They reflect it. And when humans confuse success with safety, history repeats itself. So the question is not whether AlphaBay was inevitable. The question is simpler. How many systems before it made the same mistake? And how many after it will believe they are different? The story of AlphaBay is not really about the dark web. It is about how humans relate to power, scale, and distance. Because the most dangerous thing AlphaBay created was not a marketplace. It was comfort. When systems grow large, people begin to feel smaller inside them. Responsibility feels spread out. Risk feels diluted. It becomes easy to believe that individual choices no longer matter. That someone else is watching. That someone else will stop things before they go too far. This is not a dark web problem. It is a human one. We see it in corporations that grow faster than their values. In institutions that become too complex to question. In technologies that promise efficiency while quietly removing accountability. AlphaBay shows us that scale does not erase responsibility. It hides it, and when responsibility is hidden long enough, mistakes do not disappear. They multiply. The lesson here is not do not trust systems. It is understand them. Understand who benefits, who decides, who bears the consequences when things go wrong. Because every system, no matter how large, still rests on human behavior. Habits, routines, choices made under pressure. When people stop asking questions because something feels stable, they give up the only protection they truly have. Awareness. AlphaBay collapsed because growth was mistaken for safety. Because order was confused with immunity. Because success was treated as proof that consequences no longer applied. The deeper lesson is simple. No system becomes safe by becoming larger. It becomes safe by remaining accountable. And the moment a system convinces people they no longer need to think, that moment is already the beginning of its end.